Hello, and welcome to the first in a series behind-the-scenes videos on the S.T.A.R.S VR project. My name's Don Murray, and I'll be your host as we explore the vast frontiers of VR development. In the coming months, we're going to be following the S.T.A.R.S team as they tackle some of the unique challenges that come with VR development. To set the stage for our exploration, or set the rocket off for launch, we're going to look into a brief prelude on the history of VR. The story of VR doesn't start in the 20th century. Or the 19th century. It actually starts in the year 1787. There's this man by the name of Robert Parker who came up with this new and quirky idea. You see, Robert was getting a little sick and tired of how paintings never really truly captured the scope of the cityscapes and nature that they were depicting. So, Robert came up with the idea to build a large circular room with a platform in the center and then put a painting along the curved wall of that room. So that way, when a person came up to that center platform, it would fully immerse them in a 360-degree space. The first panorama was opened just a year later. It was a view of Edinburgh, and the people went crazy for it, and soon the panorama was everywhere. You could actually go into a panorama just like we would a movie theater today. And there was also a demand for depicting world events, like the Napoleonic War. People could walk in and see the battles for themselves without actually, going to war. The panorama was kind of our first foray into stepping into a world other than the one we know. And soon enough, elements of the VR we know today were going to be invented. In 1838, a patent was published for stereoscopic 3D by Charles Wheatstone, who used the tech to build a stereoscope. If you were to look at an image of a stereoscope or the competition device, the lenticular stereoscope from Sir David Brewster, you believe it was an ancient VR headset. It was box-shaped, had two lenses, and a place to insert images in so they can be viewed in 3D. These devices were quite popular during the 19th century, and soon enough, this 3D technology was going to be used in early cinema, bringing us one step closer to the virtual reality we know today. One thing to point out, though, is a short story from the 1930s titled Pygmalion Spectacles by Stanley G. Weinbaum, a story in which a man who was unconvinced of a stranger's magical headset device that simulates a fantasy world to be real goes and tries it himself to prove a point, only to be sent into a depression once he learns that this virtual world is indiscernible from reality. This headset sounds eerily similar to the VR headsets we use today, and soon, the computer revolution was about to begin. Fast forward to 1915, you start to see some more inventions that closely resemble what we know today as virtual reality. With the new widespread usage of computers, it's understandable that scientists and inventors would want to use this technology to create an immersive virtual world. The most notable example of this is the Sensorama, invented by Morton Hellig. The Sensorama looked like more of an arcade machine than anything, and it consisted of a place for the user to sit, a place for the user to look through the viewport on the machine, stereo surround sound, fans to simulate wind, and even chemicals that can induce smells. The experience used first-person perspective short films that were synced with some of the other bells and whistles listed above, and it was intended to be used at places like arcades and amusement parks. It had films such as a dirt bike race, a helicopter ride, a walk in the park. Unfortunately, it never really went anywhere as it never ended up in amusement parks or arcades. And unless entertainment-focused technology, we did see the Sword of Damocles. The Sword of Damocles was an AR headset that utilized a set of goggles attached to a large rod that connected to the ceiling, which itself connected to a computer. The user could walk around the room and view the primitive shapes and other virtual holograms. It was never brought to market, but it did demonstrate where the future was going in terms of AR. During the 70s, we saw a few more small steps into the world of VR. Stereoscopic 3D got a little better. We saw inventions like the Data Glove, which was a wearable peripheral that you could use to interact with the computer. And we also saw the beginnings of the video game industry, which would eventually intersect with virtual reality. It wasn't until the 80s that we saw a big boom and a reflection into what we know in the modern day. This was all started by a company called VPL, which was started by Jaron Lanier. And VPL invented the iPhone. The iPhone was a VR headset paired with a set of data gloves that could connect to computers and be used much like modern VR. This product had launched in a time where the public had a lot of interest in virtual reality. You had tons of investment. You had things like the movie Tron, which was all about stepping into a virtual world. There was a lot of news coverage about this stuff. So it really seemed like VR was on the horizon. Obviously, that is not what happened. VR, as we know today, didn't continue on from the 80s, so what happened? Well, let's just say that an iPhone cost not $2,500, not $25,000, but $250,000 for a single unit. Yeah, not particularly approachable for mass audiences. In the early 90s, we actually saw a crash for virtual reality. The companies that were starting to develop it, like VPL, lost investments and kind of just fizzled out. Obviously, the 90s weren't a complete dud for VR. We had Nintendo putting out things like the Power Glove and the Virtual Boy, a very red and very failed Virtual Boy. But I also don't believe that the 90s was a complete failure for VR either, because although it wasn't focused entirely on headsets and data gloves, we had the internet and the beginnings of it. Without the internet, we would not have the virtual reality we know now. Obviously, the next 2 decades had amazing, breathtaking progress for virtual reality, and I think it's safe to say that virtual reality is very real and very here. We can thank a lot of this progress to Oculus. Oculus began the VR revolution in the early 2010s with some very impressive prototypes and an insanely successful Kickstarter. The product was popular enough that Facebook ended up buying them, leading to the product to have substantially more funding and better distribution, with the name of Facebook, now Meta, behind it. During the rise of Oculus, we also saw some other players step into the industry. We had Valve carve out their own importance with their controllers and their camera tracking. We had PlayStation bring VR to the masses with the PlayStation VR, which allowed people to use it just on their PS4. They didn't need a big expensive rig to use it. We also saw Google come out with Google Cardboard, which is just you build a cardboard thing, put your phone in it, and you're ready to go. It was easy. And soon VR was kind of accessible to anyone that wanted it. A lot of the progress of the last decade has been focused more on VR's application in video games, but as the technologies get better and cheaper and more widely available, we're going to start seeing it be used in more applications in everyday life. And you're going to start seeing these major players try to grow beyond the scope of video games. VR will be seen not just as something for entertainment, but something that can be used as a tool in the workplace or as a platform for communication across the globe. It will allow us to connect to each other in a way we only ever dreamed of. So where does that leave us? Here at the S.T.A.R.S project, we are at the frontier of a technology over 100 years in the making. In 1969, it took 4 kilobytes of RAM to send someone to the moon. And today, we intend on doing that from the comfort of your living room with nothing but a VR headset. But something like the S.T.A.R.S VR project is a massive undertaking with a lot of challenges. And the intention with the series is to show you all of those and to tell our story. I hope you enjoyed this first episode of the S.T.A.R.S VR behind the scenes videos, and I can't wait to see you next time. For now, however, I will be sending you off with a little quote from the 1930s short story Pygmalion Spectacles. Suppose I make it so that you are in the story. You speak to the shadows, and the shadows reply. And instead of being on a screen, the story is all about you. And you are in it. Would that be to make real a dream? See you next time.